Thank you so much for joining. This is Sonali Patel. I'm with Chapin Hall. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to talk to you over the next half hour and have a discussion about the Family First Prevention Services Act in Los Angeles County. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that we've got Ruby Tucker, who is supporting us. Ruby, did you want to open up with any housekeeping items before we dive into the content?
Hi, everyone. Yes, as a reminder, please mute yourself. That just helps so there's no added noise if you haven't done so already. Thank you. And then we also ask that if you would like your camera on, it can be, or if you don't like it on, you can turn it off, whatever makes you comfortable. But you now have the floor, Sonali. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Ruby. I really appreciate your support here. So as I mentioned, we are going to be in session until 3:40, so we have about a half hour for this presentation and this conversation, and really appreciate that we've got upwards of 60 plus folks that have been able to join and are interested in this topic. What I'm going to do is provide an overview of what Family First is, just acknowledging that we've got likely a different array of background knowledge on that federal opportunity. And then I'll talk a little bit about what it looks like in California and what that means for Los Angeles County. And then, you know, it'll be interesting to sort of see if we've got any time left over for discussion and questions, and I will do my best to make sure we've got an opportunity to do that. And I apologize, I was reading the wrong number. We've actually got 150 plus folks that have joined here. So really appreciate that level of interest. Let me just give you a brief background about who you're hearing from. I am currently a policy fellow at Chapin Hall Center for Children at the University of Chicago. I'm actually based here in California. So I'm up here in the Bay Area, but I am a Bruin. I got my MSW at UCLA, so really happy to be here, and my MBA from Berkeley, so have been very California-centric. And I come to you with a variety of experiences. I've worked in the federal government under the Obama administration, where my portfolio included child welfare, youth homelessness, adolescent pregnancy prevention, and children exposed to domestic violence. So I had an opportunity to really partner across federal agencies, including with the Department of Justice. I've also had the opportunity to work in state government on early childhood education and child welfare, and then have worked at local and national nonprofits, both in California and Washington, D.C., around public health, child abuse and neglect prevention, child welfare, child care, Medicaid, and TANF. So a good mix of human services issues. And if anybody's interested, my bio is up on the Chapin Hall website. So I wanted to just give you a brief overview. So our charge today is to really talk about this important federal opportunity that states and jurisdictions like Los Angeles County are now able to access, called the Family First Prevention Services Act. And I'll again provide an overview about what that is, what that entails. And then, you know, I know our focus here is to really hone in on how can FFPSA be leveraged for families experiencing domestic violence. So we'll drill in there specifically. So in terms of providing an overview for the Family First opportunity, let me start off by saying it was passed in 2018 at the federal level. It's considered one of the most significant child welfare laws passed in recent years, and it contains several different provisions. Again, I won't go into all of them in detail so we can get to the focus that we need to, right. But I do want to give you all a fair overview. So what Family First does is it really, it pretty dramatically alters the federal financing structure for child welfare programming through what's known as Title 4E. That's the largest portion of child welfare funding that's been in existence since the 1980s, where the federal government participates and helps states and counties support a portion of the funding for the child welfare services that they provide. And on a foundational level, what the legislation does for states and counties is it gives you an opportunity to really use these resources as a way to reorient your child welfare systems around prevention. So moving farther upstream, and I'll give the caveat that Family First wasn't drafted or intended to help you move as far upstream as I think many jurisdictions would like to go. But what it does do is it helps you move upstream enough where it might open up some funds where you can then resource other parts of your prevention continuum. And we'll talk more about that. It focuses on increasing family-based placements for children and youth who enter foster care, and it tries to right-size congregate care. So let me give you sort of a little bit of a visual on what that means. So it's got, as I said, multiple provisions. We won't be able to go into the majority of them, but want to make sure they're on your radar screen. So we do have provisions that California, both your at the CDS level, CDSS level, and your sort of healthcare authority, as well as the counties, are really working on how to plan for the changes to your group congregate care and your group care. So that's known as QRTP. And so that's a separate piece than what we're going to talk about here. And then there are other major provisions that get to things like extending your CHAPI program to 23. There was language around your adoption assistance savings that comes from the federal level. There's funding and support for kinship navigator programs. So again, as you hear about Family First, all of these things fall under that umbrella. What we're going to focus on is the provisions that really relate to the prevention side of things. And on the prevention side, the way the federal law is structured is that it has states and jurisdictions specify which kids and families are candidates to receive these prevention services. So you've got a fairly good amount of flexibility. It's been interesting to see as states across the country have submitted their prevention plans, how broadly the federal government has been willing to approve what those plans include. But where it does, provide the most limitations is that those kids and families that you deem eligible for these prevention services need to receive a set of evidence-based programs that the federal government has approved through their 4E prevention clearinghouse. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. So you can't plug in any prevention service in order to get the federal government to help pay for the care of these kids and families. But we'll talk about what that means and what those types of services look like. So so the prevention opportunity, again, I'll just reiterate from what you saw on the earlier slide. It is seen by many jurisdictions as an opportunity to really transform your child welfare system's focus from foster care, so removing kids and bringing them into out-of-home care, to prevention. And it can be a way to really increase family stability and well-being, especially as you try to move your system outside of the foster care removal set of approaches. It invests in evidence-based interventions, and we'll talk more about those. It requires applying a trauma-responsive lens to the continuum of prevention services, and we find that that very much aligns with the direction that many child welfare systems have already been going in. That being trauma-responsive is already well underway across the country, and this helps to drive things farther. And then it does require partnering across systems, which I think, again, is a goal that many systems have. So mental health needs to be at the table. Your Department of Public Health, with the substance use disorder interventions need to be at the table. In California and in LA County, your Title IV program has historically and continues to be a partnership between child welfare and probation. So juvenile justice is at the table. When we think about some of the interventions that have already been deemed as qualifying for Family First services, early childhood is certainly a key partner, and then health. So those, along with other systems, are really needed at the table to align your prevention efforts, even through Family First. And so states can use the Title IV funding, as I mentioned, for specific evidence-based prevention services. And so these would be services that you could offer to the children and youth that are determined to be at imminent risk of foster care and their parents or caregivers. Imminent risk of foster care, again, is something that can be defined by the states themselves, and the Children's Bureau has been fairly flexible on who they'll allow states to indicate are candidates. And then automatically in the law, pregnant and parenting youth in foster care are eligible for these services. Now, I mentioned earlier that when we talk about evidence-based services, this is where you've got a bit of a box around that. So there are 3 categories under which services can be provided through Family First. The first is in-home skill-based parenting programs. The second is substance abuse treatment and prevention programs. And the third is mental health treatment and prevention programs. So those are the 3 general buckets that the federal government is willing to help support the funding on in terms of the actual services that are provided. And so what states must do in order to access this funding is submit a 5-year prevention plan to the federal government.
So did it just get left out there too long?
California CDSS has indicated that they're expecting to submit in July of 2021. So I just want to flag there that we don't quite know what the array of services are going to be that will be available to LA County. It'll depend on what ultimately CDSS puts in their prevention plan and what the federal government approves. And that's also the case for who your candidates for Family First will be. That also needs to be in the prevention plan. But I will talk about what's in the draft that CDSS has released, so you have an idea. So this just gives you an overview.
I mean, paying kids on my mom's part.
But the first bullet is really critical. Historically, through Title IV-E, the federal government has helped pay for a portion of the out-of-home care costs for kids who come into foster care, the administrative costs, and the training costs. So they pay for a portion of it, but they only pay for certain kids that come into care. And those are kids whose parents and families meet an income test, which is an arcane income test that was attached to the program that preceded TANF. So it goes way back. And what Family First does is that it removes that income test. So all of your candidates that are deemed to be eligible, the federal government will pay for a portion of the cost for all of your kids, not just some of your kids. So it's still 50%, but it broadens it to how many kids they'll partner with you on. These prevention services are available on a 12-month by 12-month basis because they want to make sure that you're revisiting and reviewing the plan for each child. So there's a child-specific plan that's required that goes for 12 months. And your prevention services, again, must be provided with a trauma-informed framework. And then I mentioned the 50% federal reimbursement applies to services, training, and administrative costs. So let me provide an overview of the draft plan that California has released that's still under works right now. So as I mentioned earlier, this would be a 5-year prevention plan, but I think it's important for this audience to know that in the draft, CDSS indicated a couple of things. You'll see here on this slide, it says year 1 candidacy. And the reason I wanted to specify that is because CDSS has indicated that they would like to have ongoing and subsequent conversations with stakeholders on how to keep evolving your prevention plan. the federal government doesn't say you submit it once, you get approval, and you're locked in for 5 years. They actually don't have a limit on how many times you can submit for revisions and updating your plan. So I think that's important for folks to know, that even if what ultimately gets submitted this summer from CDSS, if it's more limited than stakeholders would like to see, you're not locked in for all 5 years. You can keep, keep coming back to the table with CDSS to advocate for an evolution of what they've submitted to the federal government. But for year one, CDSS has proposed these 5 categories of children and families that would be eligible for Family First services. So these are children receiving voluntary or court-ordered family maintenance services. And so these are cases that are known to DCFS. Probation youth deemed as being at imminent risk of foster care, so I think also known as your 602 petition kids. Children whose guardianship or adoption arrangement is at risk of disruption. Reunification service recipients who are on trial home visits. And then, as I mentioned, the federal law requires that pregnant and parenting youth already receive access to Family First services. And then the second part of the puzzle here, right, is you've got the kids and families that are eligible and what services are available to them. So, I'll just say Los Angeles, as Chapin Hall has been supporting planning for Family First, has made multiple, Los Angeles County, and in partnership with DCFS and probation, as well as many stakeholders, has provided some recommendations to CDSS over the last several months that have included many more evidence-based programs than what you see here. But for multiple reasons, CDSS, in the draft plan that they released, included 5 evidence-based programs in the first year. So what you see in the parentheses behind all of these, so these are organized in those 3 buckets that I mentioned, right? Mental health, substance abuse, parenting. Those are the 3 types of services you're allowed to fund through this. What you see in the parentheses are the ratings that the 4E clearinghouse has given to these interventions. So it's these 3 buckets, but you also you will get reimbursement for the programs that are rated as well supported, or promising by the 4E clearinghouse. And they continue to rate programs on an ongoing basis. And so you can see that CDSS really tried to hone in on which of the evidence-based programs they felt would be most relevant across the counties and would fall into these categories so that federal reimbursement is possible. Just to give you an overview of the relevant dates, so CDSS fairly recently released this draft plan at the end of March. LA DCFS and probation and many other stakeholders provided feedback by the mid-April deadline and expressed significant concerns that the candidates and the evidence-based programs wasn't as broad as it could be, as broad as we've seen in other state plans that have been approved. CDSS is currently reviewing that input, and they'll be undergoing tribal consultation. And at this point, they've indicated they plan to submit the prevention plan for the federal government's review and approval in July. So let me give you an idea of examples from other states as we think about domestic violence and intimate partner violence. So if you'll bear with me for just a second, I want to pull up a different document so you get a clearer idea of what that looks like. And I'll highlight just a couple of states so you have an idea of what they've been able to put in their prevention plans. The other thing I wanted to mention with the input by mid-April and over the past several months, the Child Welfare Directors Association had a framework that they'd been developing around Family First to give input to CDSS. And I wanted to highlight for folks that under the candidates, they'd given quite a bit of input, but they did include programs that promote child-parent safety and including domestic violence recovery. So you do have the county association that has requested of CDSS that this particular focus be included as they think about which candidates and what types of services are available to them through Family First. And then when we look at, just to give you an example of what could it look like and what has it looked like in other states that have included those experiencing domestic violence and intimate partner violence in their candidacy definitions, I just wanted to highlight a couple. So Arkansas included domestic violence as a risk factor. So if that's a risk factor that's captured on an assessment form, that those kids and families would have access to Family First services. And in Maryland, they wanted to specify in-home services with specific risk criteria. And so domestic violence was included. The specific language that they included is domestic violence involving a minor. So I wanted to just point out, that is a area in which other states have been willing to go in terms of specifying which kids and families might be eligible for these services. And then I wanted to just highlight a few opportunities because, I think as I said at the top of the presentation, Family First doesn't cover your entire prevention continuum, right? It doesn't get all the way up to primary prevention. It does have those limitations on which programs, evidence-based programs you can offer, and the gatekeeper is the 4E clearinghouse, and it has to be deemed as a sufficient level of support. And then there are potential limitations depending on how broad a state or jurisdiction is willing to go on your candidates. Again, that can change over the next 5+ years, right? You're not locked in. But, I think there are opportunities for those who are interested to weigh in if CDSS opens up another window for input prior to submitting this first Family First prevention plan, right, that they plan to do this summer. And, I think I'd also encourage folks to prepare to provide input in subsequent years for Family First through the Family First prevention plan process. CDSS in their draft has signaled that they want to continue to evolve the plan. So again, there's every reason to believe there'll continue to be opportunities to request that CDSS consider this population and services that impact this population. And then I think, with that foundational piece of saying, Family First will go only so far, right? The first two items I think here are opportunities to maximize it and to advocate for it to be maximized to the extent that the state is willing. But I think the other way one can look at this is whichever candidates and services are approved and are allowed through Family First prevention services, that potentially frees up local and state funds that you might currently be using for prevention that Family First will now cover, right? And so there's a way to sort of rethink what could those freed up funds be used for? Could they be used for purposes across your prevention continuum for those impacted by domestic violence and intimate partner violence? So really wanted to kind of put those, three opportunities in front of you as you sort of take in all this information about the Family First opportunity. And I know that leaves us about 5 minutes. I appreciate you all sort of dealing with the sort of level of information that I wanted to make sure you had a strong background on. But I'd welcome sort of answering questions, taking any comments. And Ruby, I don't know if we want to tag team. I haven't had a chance to keep up with the chat, so I don't know if you'd point me to any specific questions, but I'm happy to do my best to cover as much as possible. And folks should also feel free to unmute and ask, but I'm scrolling through the chat and will do my best here.
I had a question.
Yes, please.
I was able to write down FFT, TF, CBT, MI, and ACRA, but I missed on that slide the last acronym there.
Yes.
Sorry about
Yes, and what we will do is I will work with Ruby and Taylor, and we can get these slides out to folks.
Thank you. And there it is. Your one.
Sure. Yeah.
Healthy Families America.
Sure.
Thanks.
Can I ask a question? When the county put together groups of stakeholders, was there anybody representing the domestic violence community so that these conversations might have happened early on?
So the way we structured, you know, DCFS and probation, there's a broad advisory committee that's been meeting on a regular basis, I think for close to the past year. And it includes 100+ folks. And Eve, I'm sorry, I'm going to do my best to try to, I don't know that I'm going to remember everybody who's on it. But I think what we also tried to do through those 100+ folks that are on that list, when the draft prevention plan came out, we asked that sort of folks, you know, send the word out, you know, get folks to provide input where they could, but it was a short amount of time, right? And March 30th is when it came out, and April 15th is when it was due. So the other thing DCFS and probation encouraged was folks didn't only have to go through the county to give input. CDSS had actually included a link and for a Survey Monkey that anybody, any individual citizen or group or organization could provide input into. So I think we're hoping that if things didn't get quite to us because of a short amount of time, and when I say us, I mean, you know, Chapin Hall is an entity that's supporting DCFS and probation, that folks also weighed in as, you know, directly as possible.
Well, I'll say as a person who distributes information about DV to the county, no one reached out. So that's a little bit upsetting at this moment. So it goes. Maybe we can work towards the future, like you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, let's definitely follow up, because I think there's absolute interest in sort of connecting as many folks to this, you know, giving input in this opportunity as possible. We've got a couple more minutes. I'm happy to keep trying, and I just got trying to answer as many questions. A message from Taylor that the room will automatically end at 3:40. Is Tribal TANF part of this 5-year program? It is not, but you know, as I mentioned, tribal consultations are happening. So you know, I think the hope is, as there are opportunities to align and link programs, that occur and that input be captured. But I think Tribal TANF continues to sit on its own, but again, where there are opportunities to align, as I mentioned, you know, with particularly with, you know, opportunities, thinking about it through number 3, where funds are freed up, how do you then, you know, use those in the most effective way possible? It looks like we've got a couple of comments here on Parents as Teachers. Parents as Teachers is a program that's actually well supported on the 4A Clearinghouse. And I know that input was provided to CDSS that all of the well supported programs, absent some significant reason, should be included in the state's prevention plan. So we know Healthy Families America doesn't cover everything you'd want, and there are a couple of other early childhood programs that are a possibility, and I know folks have been advocating for those. Are there other burning questions that maybe I'm not seeing as quickly as I could? Okay, while I do that, let me also put up on the screen, this is my email address. Happy to have folks follow up. Like I said, I will work with Ruby and Taylor to make sure that they've got the slide deck and can share that out. But, you know, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to provide any follow-up. So we've got to clarify, family first funding would not cover families that are trying to avoid any intervention with DCFS, even a voluntary maintenance plan. So right now, as the candidacy subgroups are in the draft plan, that would be true. It does require some level of DCFS involvement, but there is input that's been provided that potentially, you know, those calls that come into the hotline that don't get screened into DCFS, that be a candidacy group that's considered. So I think there's push from folks to not just have it be the families that are known to DCFS or come into, you know, come into some sort of route through them. I think there's still opportunity to try to go farther upstream, and folks are advocating for that. Okay, let's see here. I know we've got about 30 seconds. Let's see how quickly I can talk. A lot of questions about the PowerPoint. Let's see. Do they offer parenting classes court approved? You know, there are a set of parenting interventions that are evidence-based. I don't know that court approved was necessarily a required criteria. So I think there might be some that are, and there are likely to be some that are not.